Ready to go off of the beaten path? Bet you are. Welcome back to another episode of Vax Matters.
We all deal with natural disasters and emergencies at times, and if you live in Louisiana, you know it's usually hurricanes for us. What matters is how prepared we are to face these emergencies. Our episode today focuses on not only emergency preparedness, but generator safety before, during, and after a storm. And here to give us the game plan is Dr. Rosanne Prats, Executive Director of Emergency Response at the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals. Welcome, Dr. Prats. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Diane.
It is our pleasure. So, Dr. Prats, in the introduction, I did mention that hurricanes, pretty big deal down here in Louisiana. What are the other possible hazardous situations that our residents in this state need to prepare for and definitely to have a plan for?
So hurricanes are definitely at the top of our list for hazards, followed by flash flooding, tornadoes, and then more recently, freezes. So for flash flooding, we tell our population don't drive through areas with high water. And then tornadoes, we try to tell folks, pay attention to our local weather impacts, because tornadoes can be what we call no-notice events. You don't really know where or when these things will strike. And then freezes, which we haven't seen like up north in northern parts of our country. But deep freezes can cause roads to be frozen or slick, increasing opportunities for wrecks. And then freezes can also cause impacts to our drinking water system. So we ask our residents to pay attention to notices from our water systems regarding boil water advisories.
It really is interesting that we're talking about freezes here in Louisiana, but anymore, we have to cover all the bases, and that absolutely is something. And, sometimes I think our residents aren't really thinking about that. They're not really prepared like the other, well, quote unquote, occurrences that we're more familiar with, because we haven't had that many freezes. So that was an excellent point to bring up. Thank you, Dr. Prats.
So what about building a plan for families? And people hear that all the time during hurricane season, either before the season or before an imminent storm, to have a plan, have a game plan, get a game plan. But here we are now, as we record this episode early in the year. What would be your advice for putting a plan together from your perspective all the way ahead of hurricane season or any other severe weather event?
You want to consider in advance what you may need for organizing a trip. What you would need along the way on your transport needs, what would you need on the evacuation? And then if you're staying in an unfamiliar setting, what would you need there? So things that you might need, let's say you're driving somewhere, you want to bring those diapers, that formula, their nutritional needs that they may have. When you start looking at where you might want to stay, consider staying with a family member or a location with familiar surroundings, as opposed to a shelter. Sometimes our shelters are, they're by nature mass areas where quite a few people are, and sometimes that can be disruptive to the family unit, especially when some of our young children today have autism. Another thing to consider is making sure you have an insurance card if you need medical care en route or at that alternate location. So when you leave for an event, you're going from an area that's familiar to you. You know what the patterns are. You know where you're getting your medications. You probably know the pharmacist and your doc and your providers. But then when you go to another location, all of that is disrupted. So trying to think in advance of getting those documents together so that you can at least control the things that you can control. Because there's so many things that you really can't control when you are in another location. Another thing to consider is whether the family members have chronic conditions. And so this is where your prescriptions, having additional prescription and or medical supplies would be necessary.
And doctor, there is a lot to think about. What you just said, probably for the past 2 minutes, there is a lot that needs to be taken into consideration and needs to be thought through, planned for, carried out. So that's why when you touched on, you said advanced planning. When you're thinking straight, when you're not in the kind of the emergency situation, I got to do this, got to do that. Oh my gosh, what am I forgetting? That's why we always say when there is not an emergency, you need to do that. And, we do that a lot. We always say, get a game plan, Louisiana, get a game plan. But sometimes that becomes white noise. It should not become white noise. It needs to be something that we all listen to and pay attention to. So thank you for talking about advanced planning.
Yes, and Diane, sometimes what we call that is being mentally prepared. So
Yes.
taking that quiet time to go through your checklist. And I think all of us have that behavior pattern of let me do my checklist. Well, why don't you sit down and just go through a checklist of what you would need if you had to go in a week. And some of our disasters we've seen recently for Ida and Laura have been more extensive, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Think about that, getting mentally prepared and coming up with that plan.
I think it also has a positive impact on avoiding anxiety when you've got a plan, when you know about things that you need in your house. If there is a weather event that makes roads impassable, or if there's a hurricane, if you got your stuff together already, it relieves stress in your house. And then you don't have to run out and scramble to find water or anything at a grocery store. That too is a big positive, right?
Absolutely, Clay. Absolutely.
And what's a common thing people forget when they're putting their emergency plan together or thinking about what they're going to take? Something common that people just leave out.
So prescriptions, your medical information, your insurance card, identifying papers. So I guess what we're seeing over time, and I've been here since Katrina, and then our next big storm was Gustav and Ike, and then we had Laura, Ida. We're seeing an increase in chronic conditions in our population. And so disasters can cause an extended disruption of a person or family's life and lifestyle. So making sure that those chronic conditions are managed and not further disrupted by changing their treatment plan due to unavailable information on the type and dosage level of that person's medication is going to be important. Sometimes people will put their pills in a little container. Then they'll go either to the, either a shelter environment or to the pharmacist in this area that they've now relocated to and say, well, I take this blue pill and I take this white pill. And sometimes if the pharmacist has been around for a while, they can probably cobble together what that was. But it makes a big difference in, making sure that those chronic conditions are managed, making sure your treatment plan doesn't change. Just for heart medications alone, there might be 20 different types of medications out there. And your doc probably prescribed a certain one for you. So if you just tell the pharmacist, well, I need another prescription of, a heart medication, they may change it up not knowing what your treatment plan is. So again, having those prescriptions, bringing your medical information, your insurance card, and your identifying papers will ensure that those chronic conditions can be managed wherever you are.
See, that's interesting. What do you think about having that stuff written somewhere, either on your person or with your stuff, if you have a number of prescriptions or medicines that you're taking, just in the event that you're incapacitated, someone knows what you have to have and how often you have to have it?
So a practice that I do is if I have a medication on the, they'll usually give you your little bottle, and then they have all those papers attached to it. And then some on those papers are what your medication is. And I'll simply rip off it's a sticky. And then I'll stick it on a piece of paper. And then you've got all of your list of medications, the provider that prescribed it to you, the dosage, the name, et cetera. And all you have to do is, peel it off and put it on another piece of paper and bring it with you.
That's good.
And that is a great thought to keep in mind too, because so many of us, we might not keep all of everything together, that there was a prescription. Then you have all, the papers that list everything that's in it and what it does. So that's an excellent plan. And, and Clay made the point that I tell you what, the weather world and just world in general, when we have an emergency, you do have a tendency to get anxious.
Yeah.
And that anxiety, and as you said, doctor, we can't control that,
Yeah.
but we know what we can control. It's kind of like doing a dress rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sometimes whenever I'm getting ready to go out of town for a few days or whatever, I kind of put things, 2 or 3 days ahead of time that I use every day,
Right.
just to kind of put them in a corner of my bathroom, just so that I remember, because you do it by rote.
Yeah.
You don't really think about what you use until you're going to use it or you need it. So that would be the same basic premise of what you do. That's your daily routine.
Right.
Make a plan with your daily routine so you're not caught off guard and you're not caught without taking something like your medication that's vital to your well-being. And as you said, doctor, sometimes stretches out for a few days or a few weeks or unfortunately several weeks.
So, the other part of this is because we've been through, as you just enumerated, Doc, some of the hurricanes and storms that we've dealt with since Katrina. Mental health, obviously, because of what you do, is a huge part of this. Specific to anxiety, what would be your advice outside of planning when you're talking about emergency preparedness and preparation to make certain that people could be focused on what they need to do without having any issues because of the anxiety that's created by what's in the media and in social media whenever there's some bad weather event or pandemic or something else coming?
So to me, that would be, being mentally prepared. And I think Clay and Diane, we had talked about this a little bit, but might be worth exploring a little bit more. So being mentally prepared, just going into it, eyes open, knowing that disruptions can cause stress. Going through your checklist when you are not in that anxiety provoked atmosphere, having that plan ahead of time. In emergency preparedness, we call it resourcing your plan. For some households, resourcing a plan could be challenging because it could be costly to put aside 3 days, 6 days, or maybe a week of all the supplies that they may list on Get a Game Plan. But knowing what those costs could be, again, going into it with some working knowledge of what those costs would be in the future, at least you can go into it knowing what you may be facing. Talking about the plan with your family members so that they are engaged in the planning as well, and then you go into it as a family. And sometimes having your family with you and engage with you throughout all those phases of planning and preparedness lessen some of that stress. You're going through it together, and there's a bonding that occurs with that.
And that was my next point, or the next question, to make sure the whole family is on the same page, to make sure the parents, relate to the children. And again, in a calm manner, because you don't want the children to be afraid, and you just need to do, what you can as the parent to make sure that everyone knows. And if you need to do a little rehearsal for tornadoes or what have you, that they're not afraid, that they know what to do. And that's what you were saying, doctor, that you need to do all that ahead of time. And, something else we were thinking about, that generators,
goodness.
Generators, pretty big part of life around here because especially during hurricane season or what have you, they're also, and we hear this so much. I know the weather reports always talking about this is your checklist for the safety for generators. They're very hazardous, obviously, as we know, if they're not handled properly. And one of the big ones, people always want to leave their generators on at night
or move them inside for some reason.
So can you go through some of the basic generator safety reminders for our listeners? I mean, this is very critical. And again, it's good to do this now ahead of time, ahead of any, hopefully, disasters that we have to face during the upcoming months.
So yeah, the biggest takeaway is that when the power goes out, we tend to use the generators, but we need to keep those generators outside.
Mm-hmm.
And we find that some people want to bring their generators inside because it might get stolen, which is, a sad state of affairs,
Right.
but it's not worth your life. So there are two hazardous issues to consider here. The first is an environmental exposure issue. When a generator is running, it emits the carbon monoxide, which is a tasteless, odorless, and colorless gas. And breathing high levels of it can cause the carbon monoxide poisoning, which can cause severe illness or even death. So to mitigate this exposure, never use a generator inside your home or garage, even if the doors and windows are open. You want to use it outside and more than 20 feet away from your home doors and windows. So again, the first thing you want to limit is the environmental exposure to carbon monoxide. And then the second is a safety issue. Make sure to follow the directions supplied with the generator. To avoid electrocution, keep the generator dry and don't use it in the rain or wet conditions. And then, parts of the generator can spark and ignite the gasoline fumes or spills, which then can cause a generator to catch fire or even explode. So again, it is the takeaway here is keep your generator outside when you're using it and limit the environmental exposure from the carbon monoxide. And from a safety perspective, make sure you have to use it appropriately so that it doesn't cause fires or explode on you.
This whole conversation triggers some bad memories back from Gustav in 2008 and the gas lines for the generators. And you're so right, Doc, about people not. My neighbor had one, and before I can get to him to help him, that thing went up like a Roman candle.
Did it really?
It was not good.
Oh,
but
gosh.
The thing is, like you said, people who've never handled them, you go out, you buy them, and you don't realize that they're very, very dangerous.
They're that safety. I'm going to be okay. I'm okay. I've got my generator,
right.
But they don't know how to follow through. Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
and I think that is something we cannot talk about enough, especially with hurricane season being not that far away and people are getting now, even with people who have them sitting forever and you haven't used them. And then there's just so much about that. When you think about that, going back to the generator aspect, is there more that could be done in terms of warning the public about those, particularly for people who have never owned or operated one?
Boy, that's a tough one. Again, it goes into, being prepared for a disaster. There are so many TV press releases, and we make sure the governor goes out there and starts talking about the generator safety precautions, and the local channels talk about it. And when people buy generators at the store, information is placed on those. So I think we try to use as many avenues as we can to provide some education on that. When you take a look at Hurricane Ida, which was one of our last storms, recent storms,
gosh,
there were like 30 deaths and 20% of those were related to a generator.
Wow.
So yes, if there's more things that we can do, we'd certainly appreciate those thoughts.
Yeah.
But we really want to make sure that people know how to appropriately operate a generator.
And, maybe the first time people even think about this, Doctor, as you said, Clay, they have it. They have that quote unquote insurance policy because they're going to have electricity. They've got it, but they're not ready. They don't. And then again, that's when we're talking about the stress of the situation, trying to get it, all together, trying to know what to do. Doctor, you did say that it needs to be outside. You said not even in a garage with a door open. What about, is a carport? Can you have it under a carport, or should it not be? I don't know. I don't have one.
You said about 20 feet away from doors or windows, correct, Doc?
Yes. Just so long as that carbon monoxide emissions don't get into the house. So 20 feet outside, 20 feet outside, and you want to make sure that the carbon monoxide is not going in through your windows or your front door. Yes.
Well,
and then there's generator safety tips out there that you can find on most of our government, websites, from FEMA to even LDH's website, on safety precautions on that.
And I recommend FEMA and the state over most other sites to get information on how to operate that stuff. You referenced carbon monoxide poisoning. What are some signs that people should be aware of? Because you talked about it being an odorless, colorless thing that could impact you. What are some signs that you might have a problem with that?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with, again, carbon monoxide is odorless, so it's difficult to tell that you're being exposed. So it's only during those late stages of exposure that you would see these signs and symptoms. So we don't want to depend on the symptoms, because then it could be too late. But the most common symptoms are headaches, dizziness, weakness, upset stomach, vomiting, chest pain, and confusion. And who's to say that you're not feeling those just because you're anxious?
Exactly.
And you know what I mean? So again, for this reason, it's important to have a battery-operated carbon monoxide detector in your home. Again, just impressing upon our folks here that this carbon monoxide poisoning, you'll see those signs and symptoms at late stages of exposure, and you want to make sure that people are not exposed. So don't wait for those things to occur. Have something like that battery-operated carbon monoxide detector, so that alarm goes off and you know to do something about your generator.
Well, just on another point, just to say that detector, besides having a generator, that can save a life. Just in general, to have that outside your bedroom. I know that my family lives up north, and my nieces gave a detector, I believe it was maybe as a gift, Christmas gift or whatever, to my parents, to their grandparents, for the peace of mind that they have. That's the whole thing, too. These are important no matter what in emergencies, without emergencies, to have that peace of mind. And so that's something that we should have anyhow, in the event of something unknown happening, to keep us safe, and then to have that extra added protection if in the event that there is a natural disaster then we do have the generator. So yeah, thank you, Doctor, for reminding us about that as well. Now, we talked about the emergency, preparing for an emergency, but what can you say, or what tips or thoughts do you have for our listeners today about after a storm, after a freeze, after a flood? There, I'm sure, are important safety tips for being careful and staying safe after a natural disaster that you'd like to share with us today.
Absolutely. So after a storm, there's going to be hazards, backwater flooding, floodwater contamination. Sometimes floodwaters have the overflow of sewage. So walking through, floodwaters can cause aggravation of cuts and stuff. So you want to make sure those cuts are not getting more red and sore and infected. So stay aware of the floodwater contamination. It may not always be avoidable, but you really want to, clean up well after that and monitor those cuts. Public drinking water supplies may not be safe in the aftermath of a flood, so pay attention to boil water advisories and other public health alerts through the local radio and TV broadcasts. We do have a list of boil water advisories that can be found on our website, LDH's website, for safe drinking water. Again, if you have questions about your water, you can also contact your water system. There is also increased debris after a storm. So with debris, you might have snakes and other rodents hiding in that debris, so you want to be wary and careful of that. The collection of debris can cause injuries as people try to, use their chainsaws maybe for the first time or step on rusty objects. So during this time frame, there's also an increased demand on the medical infrastructure. So if there's increases all the way around, there might be delays in seeking access to care. So you want to go about this cautiously so that, one, you can prevent, a situation from occurring for your own personal safety, but at the same time, knowing that there's an overall increase in these issues and lots more people seeking care during this time frame. You want to be aware of that as well. Other things, heat exhaustion or dehydration, exposed electrical wires. You want to be careful of those items. And then, be sure that you're updated on your vaccinations, and maybe this is part of your pre-plan, especially like tetanus.
How often do you need a tetanus, doctor? I don't remember. Is it every 10 years of tetanus?
10 years. Every 10 years.
Okay.
And if you don't know, probably check with your provider. Mm-hmm. I know long ago they would give out those little cards that said you had your tetanus shot.
Right.
But that was a long time ago.
Have you found that we as a state have become more efficient about dealing with this? I mean, you referenced Katrina. I mean, we've had almost a half dozen major hurricanes since then. We've had the Great Flood in the capital city region, a few years ago. Are we more efficient now at dealing with these things, or do we still have a long way to go?
So that's a tough question, Clay. I feel from the emergency preparedness side, we are sharp and crisp in our response when it comes to, we know how to open shelters. We know how to coordinate things with each other. We can push out talking points, and you can anticipate what these issues will be before, during, and after a storm. But there's also challenges that Louisiana faces as a state that's relatively poor. Yeah. So sometimes along with those challenges comes a population that really depends on government services to provide interim and long-term sheltering and evacuation support. So that is where the balance point occurs with trying to provide all of these services to as many people as we can, but at the same time, we truly rely on people making sure that they have their own bootstraps, so to speak, because there's not enough, there probably will not be enough services if we have reservations for all those that may need assistance.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way information is delivered from the state level during a hurricane is amazing. It's in advance.
Yep.
It's plentiful during, and then the after action reports are always very thorough as well. And people know where they can go to get the information. And obviously, to Dr. Pratt's point, Louisiana is a poverty state. We have a high poverty population here. I think we're about 5% the national poverty rate. But we do a good job, I believe, of dealing with these issues.
Yes.
And just with Ida, most recently here, the way the state got information out because of the power losses and everything you deal with. How has technology aided? Well, first, your response to that point, and then I'll ask secondarily to that, how has technology aided you in getting information to the public in the last, say, decade or so?
So I would say that Louisiana has no shortage of plans. Mm-hmm. We've been through probably every disaster now imaginable, right? And I can't believe we've all gone through a pandemic as well.
Oh my gosh. Right.
We've gone through hurricanes. We've gone through, it's almost like we're in the disaster lab of the state.
I think we're the toughest. I think we're the toughest state in the country. When I travel, I tell people Louisiana, my state, is the toughest state in America.
We're survivors. We're survivors.
Yes, yes, indeed. We're resilient. We have resilient communities.
Yep.
No one's ever died because there was a lack of food. So somehow people bring out the food. There's an opportunity of sharing.
Come on over. We got something going on over here.
Like, how do you create a gumbo in August with no power? But I've seen it done.
Yep.
We will figure that one out. We will figure that one out. But on the question of technology, there's so many little opportunities and challenges that we've overcome with technology. So one has been drones. Some of the things that we do during a disaster is to return the reinterred, the cemetery reinterment. So we not only have to bring families back to their homes, ultimately that's the goal, but those that were disrupted through the storm, from their graves, et cetera, we have to put back. And in the past, we would have to have low-flying aircraft try to identify where those graves and stuff have been upturned. But now we can do that with drone technology and, identify what the topology looks like, do some planning with that. So the drone technology has assisted us. There's some other communications technology that we've explored and used during IDA, so that we can connect various platforms together and radios together and bring up communications as quickly as we can. That's another example. Technology has greatly assisted us in emergency preparedness planning and response.
And it's all kind of part of a puzzle, I think, Dr. Prats, that you have the puzzle pieces and you've got this and this and this, and then you have these folks over here trying to help, disseminate the information. You've got, the doctors, you have, then you have the citizens who need to do their share, like you said, pull yourself up your bootstraps, you can do it. And the puzzle pieces come together and they fit together well, and we can make this work, as Clay said.
Yep.
We're strong. We are strong people, and we will survive, and we'll get through this. And I think we're an example to other parts of the country.
Listen, when you think about all of the things that we have dealt with, and how Katrina was so much of an outlier in so many ways because of and that was really a failure of some infrastructure too, but it was an outlier. But that city was rebuilt, and then the way we've handled so many things, from the floods to the pandemic, and I don't think Louisiana often enough pats itself on the back for being as resilient as we have been, and we have been.
Yes, we have.
And I think it needs to be said.
Yes, well, thank you, Clay. Yes, Katrina was definitely our game changer when it came to agency coordination on activities. And, yes, I agree with you that Louisiana is very scrappy people.
Yeah.
We will figure it out. We will figure it out and become very resilient.
Even it's something as simple as contraflow. How other states have copied that, and the way that I think during Governor Blanco's time in the office, how they were able to get people out of the southern part of the state so quickly by modifying the way we used the interstate. Is there something as it relates to emergency preparedness that we have not addressed on this episode that you'd like to get in before we wrap?
I think y'all did an excellent job of covering the scope and scale of our disaster stuff, what we covered during during, and post, and the threats. So I think we covered it all.
I'd like to ask, what's on the horizon? I know that a lot has evolved in a positive way in the last few years as it relates to emergency preparedness. Can you give us a sneak peek of where you believe this apparatus is going? What's coming?
Oh, wow. So the crystal ball question.
That's right.
Sorry.
So, every disaster, you uncover different things about your population. People, for the most part, go today in their siloed environments. I know we've got our normal ways that we communicate with each other, and whether it be school systems, home systems, etc. But when there's a disaster, with the disruption, you get a glimpse as to what that population is like. And, some things are good, some things are not so good. And some of the things that concern me is the increasing chronic diseases that our population has. And so, with COVID and the pandemic, perhaps the silver lining that I see is that we have all become internally focused as to what we want. Maybe, not out of life, but, meaningful of
right.
The meaning of life and where we're going forward. So perhaps that pause will cause us to review our own practices, our own health, and knowing that we all own emergency preparedness to a certain extent.
Indeed. Yeah.
So it might be a little bit more theoretical, but I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for us to pause, review, especially in light of all these Me Too movements and the Black Lives Matter movements. You know, what does that mean for our vulnerable populations in general who are seeking assistance from government? What does that look like? So I'm hoping it's a more hopeful outlook, but it's also reflective of where are we going in the future.
I like that hopeful and reflective. That is a fabulous way to end this particular episode. And you know, Dr. Prats, what you said, and just the bottom line, don't be lackadaisical. Mm-hmm. Don't think, oh, we're not going to have, it's going to be an easy hurricane season. I don't even want to put that word out there, you know.
Right.
But things are going to, it's not going to impact me. It's not going to affect me. I'm just going to go ahead and continue with my life. But we all need to do what we need to do for our family, for our neighborhood, for our community, for our state, as Clay said. We so appreciate you today. You have been a fabulous interview, and thank you for lending your expertise to us, Dr. Prats.
Okay. Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Clay.
Not so bad off the beaten path on this special edition of Vax Matters. We'll catch you next time.